The Mafia boss asked his son to pick a new mother among 5 rich women, but he chose the nanny. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The Mafia world is one of power, wealth, and danger, but sometimes, even the most powerful people can be blindsided by the innocence and purity of a child's heart. This is the story of a father who believed he could control everything, including his son's future, only to learn that his son had a mind of his own. It all began on a cold autumn evening when the Don of the Romano family, Alessandro Romano, made an announcement that would shake his entire world. His beloved wife had passed away under mysterious circumstances, and now, his son, Luca Romano, needed a new mother. But this would not be any ordinary decision. Alessandro wasn't just choosing a woman to fill the role of his wife. He was choosing a mother for his son, someone who could step into a life filled with danger, luxury, and deadly expectations. Alessandro gathered 5 of the wealthiest women in Italy, all from powerful families with connections that could benefit the Romano Empire. These women were intelligent, beautiful, and, most importantly, capable of handling the complexities of being part of the Mafia world. They were each given one chance to impress Luca, the heir to the Romano legacy. But Luca, only 12 years old, didn't care about wealth or power. He didn't care about the multi-million-dollar estates or the luxurious lives these women offered. Luca had always been different from his father, more empathetic, more thoughtful, and, at times, a little too trusting. Despite all the glitz and glamour surrounding the women, Luca's heart had already chosen someone. The nanny, Maria, was nothing like the other women. She wasn't from a wealthy family, nor did she have any connections to the Mafia. She was a simple woman, kind and warm, with a gentle heart that Luca had grown to trust and love like a mother. Every day, she had been there for him, through the good days and the bad, offering comfort, support, and a sense of safety that none of the others could provide. She wasn't like the women Alessandro brought into their world, who were only after his wealth or status. Maria had no agenda, no desire for power. She simply loved Luca, and it was clear to him that she was the one who truly cared about him. But when Alessandro found out about his son's choice, he was furious. How could Luca, the future leader of the Romano family, choose someone so beneath their status? It was a slap in the face to everything Alessandro had worked for. Yet Luca was firm in his decision. He didn't care about the empire or the legacy. He cared about love and trust, something that Maria had shown him since he was a child. His heart was set, and no amount of pressure could change his mind. Alessandro, torn between his pride and the love for his son, had to face a truth he had been avoiding for years. His son was growing up, and he had his own mind. This was just the beginning of the clash between father and son, a battle for control, love, and power. But in the end, it wasn't money or status that would determine their future. It was the bond between a father and a son, and the unbreakable connection Luca had with the woman who had cared for him all along. After Luca's shocking choice, Alessandro sat in his private study, staring out of the large window that overlooked the sprawling estate. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but there was no comfort to be found in their glow. His world, which had always been under his control, was now slipping through his fingers. How could his son choose someone like Maria, the nanny, over the 5 powerful women who had gathered to be his new mother? Alessandro could feel his blood boil at the thought. He had spent years building the Romano Empire, ensuring that his family would always have power, respect, and wealth. He could handle enemies in the business world, but he had never imagined a battle like this, one fought in the heart of his own son. As he sat there, his mind raced with thoughts of how to fix this. He was the boss, the patriarch of a Mafia family, and his son's refusal to choose one of the wealthy women was a direct challenge to his authority. But Luca wasn't just any boy. The young Romano heir had a stubborn streak, one that Alessandro had seen glimpses of over the years. But this was different. Luca had made a choice that Alessandro couldn't ignore, one that went against everything he had taught him. The Mafia boss took a deep breath his thoughts heavy with the weight of the situation. He needed to talk to Luca. He needed to make him understand that this was not just a personal matter. It was about the future of their family. As he made his way to Luca's room, his footsteps echoed through the cold, empty halls of the mansion. The weight of his decision settled on his shoulders. He had to fix this. When he entered Luca's room, the boy was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring out of the window. His back was straight, but there was a tension in his posture that told Alessandro everything he needed to know. Luca had made his choice, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. "Luca," Alessandro began, his voice low but firm. The boy turned slowly, his green eyes meeting his father's with a mixture of defiance and sadness. "We need to talk about your decision." Luca didn't respond immediately, his gaze unwavering. It was clear that this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. "You know what this means, right?" Alessandro continued, stepping closer. "This is not just about you or me. This is about the family, the future of the Romano name." Luca's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Alessandro could see the conflict in his son's eyes, but also something else, something that made him pause. "Do you really think Maria is the right choice?" Alessandro asked, his tone softer now. Luca's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. "She's the only one who's ever cared about me," Luca replied quietly. Alessandro's heart skipped a beat. He had never considered the possibility that his son might choose love over power. He had always believed that Luca would take the reins of the Romano Empire, but now it seemed like the boy was making his own path. "I don't care about her status, father. I care about how she makes me feel," Luca continued, his voice steady but filled with conviction. Alessandro stood there for a moment, processing his son's words. He had always believed that his way was the only way, that power and wealth were the keys to a successful future. But Luca was challenging him, asking him to reconsider everything he had ever taught him. It was a humbling moment. "Luca, this isn't just about feelings. This is about survival. You can't expect the world to treat you the way she does. People like us, people in this life, need to make choices based on power, not love." Luca shook his head. "I don't want to live in a world where love doesn't matter." There it was, the truth that Alessandro had been avoiding. His son was growing up, and he was starting to see the world differently. It wasn't just about the Mafia anymore. It was about choosing what kind of man he wanted to become. Alessandro knew he couldn't force Luca to change his mind. The boy was stubborn, and in many ways, that was one of the things Alessandro admired most about him. But this decision, it could change everything. "I can't promise you that Maria will be safe in this world," Alessandro said, his voice tinged with regret. "You know what we do? The danger is always there." Luca looked at his father, his expression softening. "I know the dangers, father, but I also know what it feels like to have someone who truly cares for me. And that's something I'm not willing to give up." The words hit Alessandro harder than he expected. He had never thought that his son would value love over power, but in that moment, he realized just how much Luca had changed. He wasn't just his son anymore. He was becoming his own man. "All right," Alessandro said, his voice hoarse. "I will do everything I can to protect her. But understand this, Luca, you've made your choice. Now you must live with the consequences." Luca nodded, a small but determined smile forming on his lips. "I can handle it, father. I'll make sure Maria is safe. But I need you to trust me." Alessandro hesitated for a moment before responding. "I do trust you, Luca. But this world isn't kind. You need to be prepared for what's coming." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving his son to face the future alone, but not entirely. For the first time in years, Alessandro felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe his son could be the leader the Romano family needed. And maybe, just maybe, love was the key to their survival after all. After their emotional conversation, Alessandro left Luca's room, his mind still grappling with his son's decision. The tension in the air felt heavier than ever before, and Alessandro knew he had to take action. The choices he made in the coming days would shape not only his son's future, but the future of the Romano family. The next morning, as the sun rose over the mansion's expansive grounds, Alessandro found himself at the head of his family's table for breakfast. His mind was still consumed by the events of the night before, and his gaze lingered over the silverware and porcelain cups before him. Luca's decision had shaken him, but Alessandro had always believed that, in the end, family loyalty would prevail. He just hadn't anticipated that his son's loyalty would lie with someone so far outside the family's traditional circle. As the servants came and went, Alessandro's thoughts shifted back to Maria, the nanny. He had never truly understood her importance in Luca's life. She was just an employee, a worker who had been there to care for his son when the rest of the family had been preoccupied with business. But now, she was a threat. Alessandro knew that if Maria was allowed to stay, she would become an obstacle to his plan for Luca's future. She didn't belong in their world. The world of the Mafia was not a place for innocent, unconnected people. It was a world of power, of influence, and of survival. And Maria was none of those things. After breakfast, Alessandro summoned his most trusted advisor, Vincenzo, to discuss the situation. Vincenzo, a man in his early 50s with graying hair and a calm demeanor, had been with the Romano family for years. He had seen it all, from the rise of their empire to the many challenges that had tested their strength. Vincenzo had always been Alessandro's right-hand man, offering advice and counsel when needed. "Vincenzo," Alessandro began, his voice cold and commanding, "we have a problem." Vincenzo raised an eyebrow but remained silent, waiting for Alessandro to continue. "Luca has chosen Maria over the women I brought for him to choose from. I can't allow this to stand. Maria does not belong in our world." Vincenzo nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I see," he said, his voice low. "And what do you intend to do about it, Don?" Alessandro's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "I will make sure Maria understands that she is not welcome here. She needs to leave." Vincenzo studied him for a moment before speaking again. "And Luca?" Alessandro's expression hardened. "Luca will learn that he cannot have everything he wants. He has to understand the importance of power, of loyalty. This isn't a world for sentimentality." Vincenzo gave a slight nod, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. "And if Luca refuses to let her go?" Alessandro's jaw clenched, and he stood up abruptly. "Then I will make him understand that the family comes first. Always." The tension between father and son had reached a breaking point, and Alessandro knew it. As Vincenzo left to carry out the plan, Alessandro couldn't shake the feeling that this was not just about Maria. It was about control. Luca was no longer the boy who followed every command. He was becoming a man, and with that came his own desires and choices. That was something Alessandro wasn't prepared to face. Later that day, as Alessandro walked through the mansion, he spotted Maria in the hallway, speaking quietly to Luca. The sight of them together, so close, sent a surge of anger through his veins. How dare she stand so freely in his house, talking to his son as if she were his equal? He approached them, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. Maria turned to see him, her face pale, and she immediately stood straighter, but Luca didn't move. "Maria," Alessandro said, his voice cold and sharp, "I need to speak with you." Maria glanced nervously at Luca before following Alessandro to the study. Once inside, Alessandro closed the door behind them, his eyes burning with intensity. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. "I will give you a choice. Leave this house on your own terms, or I will make sure you regret staying." Maria swallowed hard, her face pale. "Please, Don." "Romano, No," he interrupted, his voice firm. "You have no place here. You are not part of our world." He stepped closer to her, his presence overwhelming. "If you care for Luca, you will leave. If not, I will make sure you leave, and you won't like the way I do it." Maria's breath hitched in her throat, and she nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. She had always known that her position in the Romano household was fragile, but she never expected it to come to this. Meanwhile, Luca stood in the hallway, listening in silence, his fists clenched. He had heard enough. This was not how it was supposed to be. Maria had always been there for him, but his father's words were clear. If he chose Maria, he would lose everything. He couldn't let that happen. The choices before him seemed impossible, but Luca knew one thing. He had to act fast. He could not lose the one person who had always cared for him. Luca sat in his room, staring at the ceiling. His father's words echoed in his head, and for the first time, he felt a weight he hadn't known existed. Alessandro's threat to Maria had been clear: leave on her own, or he would force her to. The choice Luca had made was supposed to bring him peace, but now it felt like a betrayal. He had never imagined that choosing Maria, the woman who had always been there for him, would lead to this. He knew his father's world, knew the rules, and yet, he had chosen to ignore them. He had chosen love. But now that choice was coming with a price. The mansion, once a place of comfort and security, felt like a prison. Every corner of the grand estate reminded Luca of the family business, of the power and wealth his father had built, and of the darkness that came with it. He couldn't escape it. He didn't know how to escape it. But what he did know was that he couldn't lose Maria. She had been the one constant in his life. After his mother's death, she had stepped in, not just as a caretaker, but as someone who understood him, someone who didn't treat him like an heir to an empire. She saw him as a person, not as a tool to secure the family's future. The sound of footsteps outside his door interrupted his thoughts. Luca stood up quickly, his heart racing. He knew it was his father. Alessandro's presence was always intimidating, even in silence. He opened the door to find his father standing there, his face unreadable. "Luca," Alessandro began, his voice calm but filled with authority. "We need to talk." Luca swallowed hard. "I don't want to talk." "You don't have a choice," Alessandro replied, stepping into the room. His eyes scanned the space, settling on Luca. "You made a decision. Now you need to understand the consequences." Luca crossed his arms, trying to stand firm, but his heart was heavy. "I've already made my decision. And you think that's the end of it?" Alessandro's voice hardened. "You're not a child anymore. The choices you make affect everything. You've chosen Maria. But that doesn't change what this world is, Luca. It doesn't change who you are." Luca's jaw tightened. "I don't want to be what you want me to be. I don't want to live in this world of power and control. I want something real. I want someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I represent." Alessandro's eyes flashed with anger, but he quickly regained his composure. "You're naive if you think you can separate yourself from this world. It's in your blood. It's who you are." "No," Luca said, shaking his head. "I'm not like you. I won't let this world swallow me whole. I won't become what you want me to be." Alessandro's expression softened for a brief moment, but it quickly turned cold again. "You have no idea what's at stake, Luca. The decisions you make now will affect everything. You think Maria is your answer? You think she can protect you from this life? She can't. No one can." "I don't need protection," Luca shot back, his voice stronger now. "I just need to be myself. I need to live my life on my own terms." Alessandro's gaze narrowed. "And if I can't allow that?" Luca's heart skipped a beat. His father's tone was filled with menace, but Luca stood his ground. "Then I'll leave. I'll go somewhere where I can make my own choices. I'll go with Maria." The silence between them was deafening. Alessandro didn't speak for a moment, just watched his son, his face a mixture of frustration and something else, something Luca couldn't quite place. Then, with a heavy sigh, Alessandro spoke again. "I can't let you do that. Not yet." Luca's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "You're not ready," Alessandro said, his voice low. "You think you can walk away from everything, but the world will come after you. The enemies I've made, the people who will use you against me. You're not ready for that kind of life. And Maria," he paused, his eyes darkening. "She's not equipped to protect you from it." Luca clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "You don't know her like I do. She's stronger than you think. She's more than just a nanny." Alessandro's expression darkened further. "You're making a mistake, Luca. And when it comes back to haunt you, I won't be there to fix it." Luca shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm asking you to understand that I'm not you. I don't want this life." For a moment, Alessandro was silent, his gaze fixed on his son. Then, with a final glance, he turned and left the room. Luca stood there, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that the battle wasn't over. His father would never let go of control so easily, and the path he had chosen would be fraught with danger. But in that moment, Luca made a promise to himself. He would protect Maria, protect the life they could build together, no matter the cost. The war between father and son was just beginning, and Luca knew he would have to fight for everything he believed in. The days that followed Alessandro's confrontation with Luca were filled with tension, silence, and the weight of unspoken words. The mansion, once bustling with activity, now felt like a cold, empty place. Luca couldn't shake the image of his father walking away from him, the finality of the words hanging heavy in the air. He had made his choice, but his father had made his stance clear. There would be no turning back now. As the evening shadows crept through the mansion's vast corridors, Luca found himself alone in the grand living room, staring at the flickering flames in the fireplace. His mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. He had chosen Maria, but at what cost? His father's wrath was something he had never experienced before, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized how deep the roots of the Mafia went. His father was a powerful man, and the consequences of crossing him were not to be taken lightly. But Luca couldn't ignore the truth that sat deep within him. Maria was the only person who had ever cared for him in a way that didn't come with strings attached. She had never asked for power or wealth. She had only wanted to protect him. That was a bond Luca couldn't ignore. He had to protect her now, no matter what it took. Maria, on the other hand, was growing increasingly uneasy. She had seen the change in Luca's behavior, the way his father's words had affected him. She knew the danger they were both in. The world Luca was born into was not a world for people like her. It was a world of secrets, power, and ruthless decisions, and she had no place in it. The days passed with Maria trying to distance herself from Luca, thinking that the less involved she was, the safer he would be. But Luca's determination was stronger than ever. He couldn't just let her go. One night, after dinner, Luca found Maria in the kitchen, her hands busy with dishes. She didn't notice him enter, and he took a moment to watch her. She had always been so composed, so calm, but now there was an unease in her that was impossible to ignore. "Maria," Luca said softly, his voice almost a whisper. Maria jumped slightly, surprised by his presence, but when she turned to face him, she managed a weak smile. "Luca," she said quietly, "I didn't hear you come in. I need to talk to you," Luca said, his voice serious. Maria's smile faded, and she set the dish down, wiping her hands on a towel. "What's going on, Luca?" she asked, her tone cautious. Luca stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers. "I can't let you go," he said, his voice firm but filled with emotion. "I know my father doesn't want you here. I know he's angry, but I can't just pretend you don't matter to me." Maria took a step back, her expression softening. She had always known how Luca felt, but hearing it out loud made her heart ache. "Luca," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I'm not a part of this world. This is a dangerous world, and you know it." "I don't care," Luca replied quickly. "I know what this world is. I've grown up in it. But that doesn't mean I have to be like them. I want to choose my own path, Maria, and I want you to be a part of it." Maria looked at him, a mix of fear and love in her eyes. She had always wanted to protect Luca, but she knew that her presence in his life only made things more complicated. "Luca, I can't stay here," she said softly, her voice breaking. "It's too dangerous for both of us." Luca reached out, taking her hands in his. "You don't have to go. I can't lose you. You're all I have left." Maria closed her eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had always known that this moment would come, that eventually, Luca would have to make a choice between her and the life his father had set for him. But she hadn't imagined it would be so hard to walk away. "I care about you, Luca," Maria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I can't be the one to hold you back." Luca shook his head. "You're not holding me back. You're the only one who has ever helped me see that there's more to life than power and money. You've shown me what real love is. That's something I can't just throw away." Maria's heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. The words that had been trapped in her throat finally escaped. "I never wanted to be part of this world, Luca, but I can't just walk away from you. I care about you too much." Luca's face softened, and he pulled her into a tight embrace. "Then stay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stay with me. We'll figure it out together." Maria hesitated, but as she looked into Luca's eyes, she saw the sincerity and determination there. He wasn't the child he used to be. He was becoming a man, and she realized that no matter how dangerous it might be, she couldn't turn her back on him. "All right," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll stay, but we need to be careful, Luca. Your father, he won't. Just let this go." Luca nodded, his heart heavy but resolute. "I know, but we'll face it together." The decision had been made, and as the night settled around them, Luca and Maria both knew that their lives would never be the same. The storm that was brewing in the Romano family was about to reach its peak, and there was no turning back now. The days that followed Luca's decision were filled with uncertainty. Alessandro, the head of the Romano family, had never been one to back down from a challenge, and the decision his son had made was not just a rebellion. It was a direct confrontation with everything he had spent years building. Alessandro wasn't used to losing, and his pride was not something easily broken. But as the days turned into weeks, Alessandro's anger shifted from fury to something far more dangerous: calculation. He would not let his son's choice stand without consequences. The power struggle between father and son was escalating, and with every passing moment, Luca knew he was running out of time. He could feel the pressure mounting, and despite his resolve to protect Maria, he couldn't shake the growing fear that they were both walking a dangerous path. One evening, after dinner, Luca found himself alone in the garden, his thoughts heavy. He knew what was coming. His father's methods were ruthless, and he wasn't about to allow his son's defiance to go unpunished. Luca had spent years trying to understand his father, trying to navigate the complex world of the Mafia. He had always been told that power was everything, that loyalty to the family was paramount. But now, standing on the precipice of everything he knew, Luca realized that his world was crumbling, and the only way to survive was to make a choice. His father was not just a businessman. He was a king in his own right, and kings didn't share their thrones willingly. He had spent years teaching Luca how to rule, how to control, how to dominate. But now Luca was rejecting everything he had been taught. He had chosen Maria. She had always been there for him, providing the care, warmth, and love that his father never could. And in that moment, Luca knew he couldn't walk away from her, no matter the cost. Maria had been the one constant in his life. She had never seen him as just the heir to the Romano Empire. She had seen him as Luca, a boy who needed love and protection. And now, despite the Mafia boss's threats, Luca knew he had to protect her. The evening air was cool, and Luca's thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps. He turned to see Maria walking toward him, her eyes filled with concern. She had always been able to sense when something was wrong, and now, more than ever, he needed her. "Luca," Maria said softly, her voice gentle but filled with worry. "What's going on? You've been distant these past few days." Luca forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine," he lied. "It's just, everything feels so complicated." Maria stepped closer, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You don't have to carry this burden alone, Luca. I'm here for you. Always." Luca closed his eyes for a moment, taking in her words. He had never felt more torn. His father's expectations, his family's legacy, and Maria, all of it seemed so far apart. "I don't know what to do, Maria," Luca admitted, his voice shaky. "My father is not going to let this go. He won't let me live my life the way I want to. And I can't lose you." Maria looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "You won't lose me, Luca. But you have to be careful. This world, it's not kind to people like us." Luca nodded, his thoughts racing. He knew the danger they were in, but he also knew he couldn't back down. "I don't care about the world, Maria. I care about you, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Maria's heart ached as she looked at him. She had always wanted to protect him, to keep him safe from the world his father had thrust upon him. But she knew that, in the end, it was Luca who would have to fight for their future. The next few days were tense. Alessandro's presence in the mansion felt like a storm waiting to break. Luca knew his father was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake, but Luca refused to give in. He couldn't. One evening, after another heated argument between father and son, Alessandro summoned Luca to his study. The air was thick with tension as Luca entered, his father, sitting at his desk, his expression unreadable. "Sit down, Luca," Alessandro ordered. Luca hesitated for a moment before obeying, taking a seat across from his father. "You think you can defy me?" Alessandro's voice was cold, his eyes narrowing as he studied his son. "You think you can choose a woman like Maria over everything I've built for you?" Luca didn't flinch. "I've made my choice, father. Maria is the one I want to be with." Alessandro's gaze hardened, his fists clenching at his sides. "You think she can protect you from this world? From the people who will use you to get to me?" Luca's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't back down. "I don't need protection, father. I just need to be with the person who cares about me, not my title." Alessandro's eyes flashed with anger. "This is not a game, Luca. This is the Mafia, and you are not above it." The room was silent for a moment, the tension palpable. Then Alessandro spoke again, his voice low and menacing. If you choose this woman, then you choose a different path. One that will not lead to power. One that will leave you vulnerable. Luca stood up, his fists clenched. I've made my decision. I will not be a part of your world anymore if it means losing who I am. Alessandro stood as well, his eyes dark with fury. Then you are no longer my son. With those words, Alessandro turned and left the room, leaving Luca standing in the midst of his shattered world. Luca knew that the battle was far from over, but in that moment, he felt stronger than ever. He had chosen Maria, and now, he would fight for her with everything he had. The days following Luca's confrontation with his father were filled with a growing sense of unease. Alessandro had made it clear that his son's choice would come with severe consequences. The Mafia world was unforgiving, and Luca was beginning to feel the full weight of that reality. He had chosen Maria, but his decision had placed him in direct opposition to everything his father stood for. As each day passed, Luca could feel the tension tightening around him, like a noose slowly closing. He had hoped that his choice would bring him peace, but it seemed to have ignited a storm. In the quiet hours of the night, Luca lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with the thoughts he couldn't escape. His father's warning still echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the power Alessandro held. You are no longer my son, his father had said, and those words stung more than Luca had expected. He had known that there would be consequences, but hearing those words felt like a final severance of the bond they had shared for so many years. Maria, on the other hand, was just as uneasy. She had always known that being involved with the Romano family was dangerous, but the reality of the situation was beginning to hit home. She had been a part of Luca's life for years, watching him grow from a young boy into the man he was becoming. She had never imagined that their bond would put both of them in danger. But here they were, facing the consequences of a decision that neither of them had truly understood until now. Maria could see the change in Luca. He was no longer the carefree boy who had once sought her comfort. He was becoming more like his father, calculating, determined, and cold. The warmth that had once defined their relationship was now clouded by the harshness of the world they inhabited. One evening, as Luca and Maria sat together in the garden, the weight of the silence between them was palpable. They had always been able to communicate without words, but now, every glance felt like an unspoken question. Maria could feel Luca's tension, his need to act, to fight for what he believed in, but she was afraid of what his defiance might cost him. Luca, Maria said quietly, breaking the silence. I don't want to lose you, but I don't know if we can keep going like this. Luca turned to her, his expression hardening. We don't have a choice, Maria. My father has made it clear that he'll stop at nothing to get what he wants. But I won't let him take you away from me. I won't let him control me. Maria's heart ached as she looked at him. She had always known how strong-willed he was, how determined to carve his own path. But she couldn't help but worry about what he was willing to sacrifice in the process. You don't have to do this, Luca. You don't have to keep fighting him. We can leave. We can start over somewhere else, somewhere safe. Luca shook his head, his jaw tight with resolve. Leaving isn't the answer. I've spent my whole life trying to be something my father wanted. But I'm not him, Maria. I don't want to be a part of this world, but I won't run away from it either. I have to fight for what's mine. Maria reached out, taking his hand in hers. And what's yours, Luca? What do you really want? Luca's gaze softened, and for a moment, he wasn't the heir to the Romano Empire, the son of the Mafia boss. He was just a young man in love, torn between the life he had been born into and the life he wanted to build. I want you, Luca whispered. I want a life with you. But I can't have that if I don't stand up to him. Maria's heart fluttered in her chest, but the fear that had been building in her since the moment she realized what this would cost them both was overwhelming. You don't have to do this alone, Luca. We can fight together, but you have to promise me that you won't let this destroy us. Luca nodded, squeezing her hand. I promise, Maria. I'll do whatever it takes to protect us. The next day, the storm that had been building finally broke. Alessandro's men arrived at the mansion, their presence a clear indication that the situation was escalating. Luca knew that his father's patience had worn thin. This was no longer about Maria. This was about power, control, and the price of defiance. As the men entered the estate, Luca stood tall, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that his father had sent them to force him into submission, but Luca wasn't going to back down. He couldn't. The door to his study opened, and Alessandro entered, his eyes cold and unforgiving. "Luca," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've made your choice. Now you will face the consequences." Luca stood firm, refusing to look away. "I've made my decision, father, and I won't change it." Alessandro's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on the handle of a gun tucked beneath his suit jacket. "You think you can defy me, boy? You think you can choose a woman like Maria over everything I've built? You will regret this." Luca's heart raced, but his voice remained steady. "I won't regret it. Not ever." Alessandro's gaze hardened, and for a moment, the room was filled with the tension of a father who had lost his son to a world of his own making. But Luca wasn't afraid anymore. He had made his choice. He had chosen love, and now he would fight for it. The night air was thick with tension as Luca and Maria stood side by side, watching Alessandro's men leave the mansion. It was clear that the situation was escalating faster than they had anticipated. Luca could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him, but he knew, deep in his bones, that he had made the right choice. He had chosen Maria over everything, over his father's empire, over the future that had been planned for him since birth. But as the days passed, the consequences of that choice began to unfold. Alessandro had not taken kindly to being defied. The Mafia boss had always controlled every aspect of his life, from his business to his family, and Luca's rebellion was a challenge he could not let slide. It didn't take long for Luca to realize that he was no longer a part of his father's world, and that in itself carried a dangerous cost. Maria, ever the compassionate presence in his life, tried her best to reassure him. "Luca, we'll figure this out together." But Luca couldn't shake the feeling that everything was slipping away. As the week wore on, the silence between them grew heavier. Maria noticed the changes in Luca. He was no longer the young man who had stood by her side, full of hope and determination. Now, he was haunted, weighed down by the consequences of his choices. Every night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the reality of his situation. He had walked away from everything he knew, but in doing so, he had made himself vulnerable. One evening, Luca found himself in the study, his hands trembling as he stared at the papers before him. They were financial records, contracts, and a series of handwritten letters, evidence of his father's reach and power. Alessandro had been more than just a businessman. He had built a network of influence that stretched far beyond the walls of their home. Luca had never realized just how deep the connections went until now. "You can't just walk away from this," Luca muttered to himself. "This is who I am. This is what I was born into." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. He didn't want to be like his father. He didn't want the empire. He wanted freedom. He wanted peace. But how could he have those things when his father's empire was so vast? When the people in his life were connected to a world that never let go? As Luca sat there, lost in thought, Maria entered the room, her presence a quiet comfort. "What's going on, Luca?" she asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. Luca looked up at her, his heart heavy. "I've made a mess of everything, Maria. My father won't let me go. He'll come after us. He'll do whatever it takes to get me back under his control." Maria moved closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Luca, we don't have to fight him alone. We'll figure this out together." But Luca's mind was already made up. He knew what he had to do. "I can't keep running, Maria. I can't keep hiding from my father. He'll destroy everything I care about if I don't face him head on." Maria's eyes widened with concern. "Luca, no. You can't do this. It's too dangerous. You're not ready for the fight he'll bring. He's ruthless." Luca stood up, determination settling over him like a cloak. "I don't have a choice. I have to stand up to him. I won't let him control my life anymore." Maria watched him, her heart torn between fear for his safety and pride for his bravery. "But what about us? What about our future?" "Our future," Luca replied, his voice firm, "starts with me standing up to him. I have to face him. I won't let him take you away from me." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Luca made the difficult decision to confront his father head-on, knowing the risks involved. Maria, though scared for him, stood by his side, her heart torn but unwavering. She couldn't ask him to run away. She couldn't take away his courage, no matter how much she feared for him. The night of the confrontation, Luca and Maria stood in the grand entryway of the Romano estate, the cold marble floors reflecting the dim light of the chandelier above. Alessandro had summoned Luca to meet him in the study, and there was no turning back. "This is it," Luca said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet determination. Maria looked at him, her eyes soft with love and concern. "Be careful, Luca. Please." Luca nodded, squeezing her hand gently before turning to face the door that would lead him to his father. As he stepped into the study, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Alessandro sat at his desk, his expression cold and unreadable. "Luca," he said, his voice low, "you've made your choice. Now, you'll face the consequences." Luca stood tall, refusing to show any fear. "I've come to take responsibility for my choice. I'm not the boy you raised, and I'm not going to be the man you want me to be. I've chosen Maria, and I won't regret it." Alessandro's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "You think you can just walk away from everything I've built? You think you can choose a woman like her over this empire?" Luca's voice was firm, but there was a trace of sadness in his words. "It's not about the empire, father. It's about the life I want to live. The life I choose. And I choose her." Alessandro stood up, his chair scraping against the floor as he moved toward Luca, his gaze hardening. "Then you are no longer my son," he said, his voice cold with finality. The words stung, but Luca stood his ground. "I'm not your son anymore. I'm my own man. And this is my choice." Alessandro's eyes burned with anger, but there was something else in his gaze now, something like recognition. He had always known his son was different, but now, he realized that Luca was not someone he could control. He was becoming something else. The confrontation ended without further words, and as Luca left the study, he knew that nothing would ever be the same. His decision had been made. His future, and the future of the Romano family, would now unfold in ways that neither of them could have predicted. The days after Luca's final confrontation with his father felt like they stretched on forever. Alessandro's decision to sever all ties with his son had left Luca reeling, though deep down, he knew it was inevitable. His father had always valued power above all else, and the choice Luca had made had threatened everything Alessandro had spent his life building. But Luca's resolve was unwavering. He had made his choice. He would never regret it. Maria had been his pillar of strength, and he couldn't imagine his life without her by his side. As the days wore on, however, Luca and Maria found themselves in an increasingly precarious situation. Alessandro wasn't the kind of man to let a challenge go unanswered, and his anger was only growing. His empire was built on fear, and Luca had broken one of its most sacred rules. He had chosen love over loyalty to the family. Alessandro's men had begun to make their presence felt, watching Luca from the shadows, waiting for him to make a mistake. The tension in the house was palpable, and Luca couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in on him. He had tried to escape this life, but it was clear now that there was no way out without consequences. One night, after dinner, Luca found himself alone in the study, staring at the papers that lay scattered across the desk. His mind was consumed by the weight of his decision and the uncertain future that awaited him. He had never felt more isolated. His father's words echoed in his head, reminding him of the cost of his defiance. "You are no longer my son," Alessandro had said. Those words cut deep, and Luca couldn't help but feel the sting of his father's rejection. He had always admired the man who had raised him, but now he was faced with the painful truth. He was no longer part of that world. "Maria," Luca whispered to himself, his thoughts drifting to the woman who had always been there for him, the one person who had never tried to use him. She had been the only one who cared for him without any ulterior motives. But in this world, love could only take them so far. The sound of a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Luca quickly wiped the thoughts from his mind and opened the door to find Maria standing there. Her eyes were filled with concern, and Luca could see the worry etched on her face. "Luca," Maria said softly, "are you okay?" Luca forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm fine, Maria. Just thinking about everything." Maria stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "I know this is hard," she said, her voice gentle, "but we'll get through it together. You don't have to face this alone." Luca looked at her, the weight of the world in his gaze. "I don't know how to do this, Maria. My father has made it clear that there's no place for me in his world anymore, and I don't think I can keep running from him." Maria reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to run, Luca. You can stay here with me. We'll figure it out. We can leave this world behind and build something new." Luca shook his head. It's not that simple, Maria. My father is too powerful. If I stay, he'll destroy everything. And I won't let that happen to you. Maria's heart sank as she looked at him. She knew Luca was right. His father would stop at nothing to regain control, and they both knew that being part of the Romano family meant living under constant threat. Then we fight, Maria said, her voice steady. Luca looked at her in surprise. Fight? How do we fight someone like him? Maria's eyes were filled with determination. We do what we have to do to survive. We won't let him take away what we've built together. Luca took a deep breath, his heart pounding. But I can't keep you safe, Maria. Not in this world. It's too dangerous. Maria smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. We'll make our own path, Luca. Together. The next few days were a blur of planning, uncertainty, and growing tension. Luca knew that his time was running out, and the longer he waited to confront his father, the more dangerous things would become. Maria had insisted that they face the situation head-on, but Luca couldn't help but feel the weight of the danger that loomed over them. Alessandro was relentless, and Luca knew that his father would stop at nothing to destroy him and everything he held dear. As the days wore on, Luca's resolve began to harden. He had made a choice, and he would stand by it, no matter the cost. He couldn't lose Maria, not after everything they had been through together. But the more Luca thought about the situation, the more he realized that he was facing a battle he might not be able to win. Alessandro had never been one to back down, and now, he was faced with a son who had chosen to defy him. Luca couldn't keep running from the family business. He had to face it, and he had to do it on his own terms. One evening, as Luca sat in the study, a familiar sound reached his ears, the sound of footsteps outside the door. He knew it was Alessandro. His father had come to confront him, and Luca had no choice but to face him. As the door opened, Alessandro entered, his eyes cold and filled with anger. Luca, he said, his voice low, you've made your decision. And now, you will face the consequences. Luca stood tall, refusing to show fear. I've made my choice, father, and I won't regret it. Alessandro's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. Then you are no longer part of this family, he said, his voice cold and final. Luca felt the weight of his father's words, but he stood firm. I am who I am, father, and I will not be controlled by you anymore. The silence between them was thick, the tension unbearable. Alessandro studied his son for a moment before speaking again. Then you've chosen your path. But remember, Luca, this world doesn't forgive. And neither will I. With those final words, Alessandro turned and left, leaving Luca to face the storm that was about to break. Luca knew that the battle had only just begun, but in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, freedom. The days after Luca's decision were filled with uncertainty, and every moment felt like a countdown to something inevitable. His father's final words, "You are no longer part of this family," rang in his ears like a death sentence. Alessandro, the Mafia boss who had shaped Luca's world, had cut all ties with him. But Luca couldn't afford to dwell on the consequences. The future that awaited him and Maria was at stake. For days, Luca and Maria stayed holed up in the mansion, the once luxurious walls now closing in around them. The power of the Romano name still loomed over them, but Luca had made his decision. He wasn't going to let his father control him anymore. He wasn't going to be a pawn in the Mafia world. They had no choice but to face what was coming, even if the path ahead was uncertain. Maria could sense the tension in Luca, the weight of the decision beginning to take its toll. She had always been there for him, but she could see the change in him. His resolve was strong, but the pressure of defying his father was wearing him down. One evening, as Luca sat at the grand piano, absent-mindedly playing the same notes over and over, Maria approached him. "Luca," she said softly, "you've been quiet. What's going through your mind?" He stopped playing and looked at her, his expression hard. "I'm thinking about what comes next. I don't regret my choice, Maria. But the world we live in doesn't let you walk away. My father will come for me. He will do whatever it takes to drag me back into the life I rejected." Maria sat down beside him, her hand gently resting on his. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered. "We'll face whatever comes, together." Luca took a deep breath, nodding, but his mind was elsewhere. He knew Maria's support was unwavering, but he also knew they were running out of time. Alessandro would not let this go. His father was a force of nature, and the Mafia was ruthless. The decision to defy him had consequences that would not be easily avoided. That night, as they lay in bed, the weight of the situation was almost unbearable. Luca couldn't sleep. His mind kept racing, wondering what his father's next move would be. Would Alessandro send more men? Would he resort to something even more drastic to bring Luca back into the fold? Maria, sensing his unrest, turned to him. "Luca, what are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. "I'm thinking about how much I've lost," Luca confessed. "I've lost my father, my place in the world. Everything I knew, everything I thought I could control, is slipping away, and I don't know how to stop it." Maria reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "You're not alone in this, Luca. We'll figure it out. Together, we can face anything." But even as she spoke the words, she couldn't help but feel the weight of their situation. They were being hunted, both by the family Luca had left behind and by the world that followed Alessandro's every command. The next morning, as Luca walked through the mansion, the doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. His heart skipped a beat as he approached the front door. He wasn't expecting visitors, especially not anyone from his father's world. When he opened the door, he was met by one of Alessandro's most trusted men, Dominic Marino. Dominic was a hulking figure, his presence enough to make anyone uneasy. His dark suit fit him perfectly, and his cold, calculating eyes gave nothing away. "Luca Romano," Dominic said, his voice low and intimidating. "Your father requests your presence." Luca felt a chill run down his spine. He had been expecting this. His father had finally made his move. "I don't think I have anything to say to my father," Luca replied, his voice steady but filled with tension. Dominic didn't flinch. "It's not about what you think. It's about what he wants." Luca's heart raced. He had hoped to avoid this confrontation, but it seemed that his father had other plans. "I'll go with you," Luca said, his voice firm. "But Maria stays here." Dominic nodded slightly, motioning for Luca to follow. As they left the mansion, Luca's mind raced with possibilities. He had no idea what Alessandro would say or do when they met face to face again. Would his father threaten him? Would he try to break his will? Or was this the moment where everything would come to a head? The drive to Alessandro's estate was long and silent. Dominic didn't speak a word, and Luca's thoughts were consumed by what was waiting for him at the end of this journey. When they arrived, Luca was led through the grand entrance of his father's mansion. The halls, once familiar, now felt like a maze of power and control. Every step he took brought him closer to the man he had once admired, but now saw as a force to be reckoned with. Alessandro was waiting in his study, his back turned to Luca as he stood by the window, looking out over the city. The moment Luca entered, Alessandro turned, his eyes sharp and filled with something Luca hadn't seen in years, disappointment. "You came," Alessandro said, his voice heavy with authority. "But it won't change anything, Luca. You've made your choice, and now you will pay the price for it." Luca stood, tall, refusing to show any fear. "I've made my decision, father, and I'll stand by it, no matter what." Alessandro's eyes darkened, his gaze never leaving Luca's. "You think you can walk away from me? From this family? From everything I've built?" Luca didn't flinch. "I'm not walking away. I'm choosing my own life. My own future." Alessandro took a step forward, his voice low and threatening. "Then you've chosen the wrong future, Luca." The tension in the room was thick, the air charged with the weight of years of unspoken words. It was clear that this moment would define everything that came after. The battle between father and son had reached its breaking point, and neither of them was willing to back down. The atmosphere in Alessandro's study was thick with tension, each second dragging on like an eternity. Luca could feel the weight of his father's cold gaze bearing down on him, but he refused to flinch. His father's words had been sharp, filled with the venom of years of control and expectation. But Luca wasn't the boy he had once been. The days of simply following orders, of living in the shadow of his father's legacy, were over. He had chosen Maria, and no amount of pressure would make him change his mind. Alessandro stood before him, his broad frame looming as he looked at his son with a mixture of disappointment and rage. "You think you can just throw everything away?" Alessandro's voice was low, dangerous. "You think you can walk away from this family and live your own life, free from the consequences?" Luca's heart pounded, but he met his father's gaze with a steadiness he had never felt before. "I'm not walking away, father. I'm choosing something different. I'm choosing a life that's mine. A life with Maria. Alessandro's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening in anger. Maria? A nanny? A woman who has no place in our world? You've chosen a weak, vulnerable woman over the power, the respect, and the control this family offers you. Luca stood taller, his voice unwavering. She's the only one who's ever seen me for who I am. Not the heir to the Romano Empire, not a pawn in a game of power. Just Luca. Alessandro's expression darkened, his anger rising. And you think she can protect you from this world? From the people who will do anything to destroy you and everything you love? You're a fool, Luca. You don't understand the danger you're in. Luca's breath quickened, but he stood his ground. I understand perfectly, Father. I know the risks, but I won't live in fear anymore. I won't live a life where everything is decided for me. I'm done with that. Alessandro stepped forward, his voice growing colder. Then you've made your choice, and I'll make sure you regret it. The finality in his father's voice made Luca's stomach drop. He knew his father wasn't bluffing. The consequences would be severe, and there was no escaping them. But Luca wasn't afraid anymore. He had made a promise to Maria, and he would keep it. He wouldn't let fear control him any longer. As the silence between them stretched on, Alessandro's face softened for a moment, a flicker of something resembling sadness crossing his features. You were always meant to lead, Luca, to take my place. But now, I see that you're not the man I thought you were. You're weak. The words stung, but Luca knew they were just another attempt to break him. I'm not weak, Luca replied, his voice strong. I'm my own man, and I don't need your empire to prove it. Alessandro stared at him for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and resentment. Finally, he turned his back on his son, walking toward the window. You've made your decision, but don't think for a second that this is over. The family will never forgive you for this, and neither will I. Luca's chest tightened, but he didn't let his father's words get to him. He had already made his choice, and no matter what happened next, he wouldn't back down. I'm sorry you feel that way, Father, but I'm not changing my mind. With those words, Luca turned and walked out of the study, his heart racing. He knew his father would stop at nothing to get him back, but Luca was ready. He would fight for his life, for the life he wanted with Maria. The battle had only just begun. Outside, the cold night air hit Luca's face as he made his way back to the mansion. His thoughts were consumed with what had just happened. Alessandro's rejection stung, but he knew it was something he had to face. He couldn't change his father's mind, and he didn't want to. He was done living in the shadows. As Luca entered the mansion, Maria was waiting for him in the hallway, her face filled with concern. Luca, are you okay? She asked softly, stepping toward him. Luca nodded, though his mind was still racing. I'm fine, but it's not over. My father won't let me go so easily. Maria placed a hand on his chest, her eyes searching his face. You don't have to fight this battle alone, Luca. We'll face it together. Whatever happens, we're in this together. Luca looked at her, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. Maria had always been there for him, even when things seemed impossible. I don't know what I would do without you, Maria, he said quietly, pulling her into a tight embrace. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I promise. Maria smiled up at him, her eyes filled with warmth. I know you won't, Luca, but you need to be careful. Your father won't stop. He's ruthless. Luca sighed, his mind heavy with the weight of what was to come. I know, but I can't back down. I won't let him control me anymore. I'm ready to fight for what I believe in. For us. Maria kissed him softly, a promise in her eyes. Then we'll fight together. The next morning, Luca knew it was time to make his move. Alessandro wouldn't stop until he had his son back under his control, and Luca couldn't let that happen. He had already lost so much, but he wasn't going to lose the woman he loved. He wasn't going to lose himself. He was ready to take on whatever came next. With Maria by his side, Luca knew they would face whatever dangers lay ahead. And for the first time, he felt a sense of freedom. It was a long road ahead, but he was ready to fight for the future he had chosen. The tension in the mansion was palpable. Every step Luca took seemed heavier than the last. He had made his decision, but now the consequences were beginning to unfold in a way he hadn't fully anticipated. His father, Alessandro, was relentless, and Luca had seen the Mafia boss's wrath firsthand. But Luca wasn't the boy who used to cower in his father's shadow. He wasn't going to let fear control him anymore. His heart raced with determination, But there was a constant, gnawing worry at the back of his mind. What if Maria became a target? What if this rebellion put her life in danger? That was the last thing he wanted. Maria had always been his rock, and he couldn't bear the thought of her getting hurt because of his decisions. He paced back and forth in their room, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the walls. Maria, who had been quiet for most of the day, stood by the window, looking out at the city below. The silence between them had grown thick, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Maria turned to Luca, her eyes filled with concern. "Luca, what are you thinking?" she asked softly. "What's going to happen next?" Luca stopped pacing and looked at her. "I don't know, Maria," he admitted, his voice strained. "I've made my choice, but I don't know what comes after. My father's not going to let me go. He's already made it clear that he'll do anything to bring me back under his control." Maria crossed the room and stood in front of him, placing her hands on his chest. "You can't let him control you anymore, Luca. You've chosen a different life. We've chosen a different life. And we'll fight for it, together." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had always known she was by his side, but hearing her say it so clearly reminded him that he wasn't alone in this. He had made his choice, and Maria was part of that choice. He couldn't give up on her now, no matter what. "You're right," Lucas said, his voice filled with resolve. "We'll fight, but I won't let you get hurt. I'll protect you, Maria. I won't let my father's world destroy what we have." Maria smiled, a small but genuine smile that made Luca's heart ache with love. "I trust you, Luca, but we need to be careful. Your father won't stop until he gets what he wants. And right now, what he wants is you back in the fold. He won't let you go that easily." Luca nodded, his thoughts racing. "I know, but I won't go back. Not to that world. Not to the man he wants me to be." The next morning, they awoke to a new level of tension. Luca knew that the calm they had felt in the days before was an illusion. His father would not wait long before making his next move. He had to act. It was time to take control of his future. As the day wore on, the weight of the situation began to settle heavily on Luca's shoulders. His phone buzzed, and he glanced down to see an unknown number. A cold shiver ran down his spine as he answered the call. "Luca Romano," a deep voice said on the other end. "Your father wants to see you. It's time to end this charade." The voice was calm, but Luca could feel the threat lurking beneath the surface. He didn't have to ask who it was. It was one of his father's men. "Tell him I'm not coming back," Luca said firmly. "This is over." The line was silent for a moment, and Luca could hear the muffled sound of voices in the background. "You think it's that easy? Your father doesn't take kindly to rejection. He'll make sure you regret this decision." The words were a threat, but Luca wasn't intimidated. "I've already made my decision. I'll never go back." He hung up the phone, the finality of his words echoing in the room. Maria looked at him, her expression filled with concern but also a quiet understanding. "What's next?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Luca's gaze hardened. "We stand our ground. We don't run, and we don't back down." Later that evening, Luca made his way to the old, familiar building where his father's operations had once thrived. The building stood like a fortress, its dark windows reflecting the fading light of the day. As he approached, he could feel the weight of what was coming. He had known this moment would come. He had known that his father would never let him go so easily. The heavy metal doors of the building creaked open as Lucas stepped inside. He wasn't sure what he expected, but the air was thick with anticipation. His father's men were scattered throughout, their cold eyes following his every move. Alessandro was waiting for him in the center of the room, a place where Luca had once stood proudly by his father's side. But now it was different. Now, Luca was the one who had defied him. "Luca," Alessandro's voice cut through the silence. "You've made your choice. You've turned your back on this family, on everything I've built for you." Luca stood tall, his jaw set with determination. "I've chosen my own path, father. Not the one you wanted for me." Alessandro's eyes narrowed, his face contorting with anger. "You think you can just walk away from everything I've worked for? You think you can choose a life of weakness and expect to survive in this world?" Luca didn't flinch. "I'm not weak, and I don't need your world to survive." Alessandro's lips curled into a sneer. "You'll learn soon enough, Luca. The world doesn't forgive, and neither do I." But Luca wasn't afraid. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The silence in the room was deafening as the two men locked eyes. It was clear that the battle between father and son was far from over. But Luca knew deep down, that there was no turning back now. The world he had left behind, the world his father had created, was not his. He had made his choice, and he would stand by it, no matter the cost. The air in the room was heavy with the consequences of the decisions that had been made. Luca stood firm, his back straight and his heart pounding, facing the man who had once been his role model, his father, the patriarch of the Romano family. Alessandro's glare could have cut glass, but Luca held his ground, knowing there was no going back now. Alessandro's empire was built on control, power, and ruthlessness, but Luca had chosen something different, something real, something that felt like freedom. The moment in the study, the confrontation that had been building for so long, had finally come to its head. But as Luca looked at his father, he realized that this wasn't just a fight for control. It was a fight for his future, for his soul, and for the life he wanted to build with Maria. "You think you've won, Luca," Alessandro said, his voice cold, "but you're wrong. You can't escape this life. It's in your blood. It's who you are, whether you like it or not." Luca's heart raced, but his voice was steady. "I've already made my choice, father. I'm not you. I don't want your empire, your power, or your control. I want a life of my own. I want to live for myself." Alessandro's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something, perhaps regret, perhaps disappointment. But it quickly vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating look Luca had grown up with. "You can run, Luca, but you'll never be free. I built this empire for you, for the family. And now you're throwing it all away for a woman who can't even protect you." "Maria isn't just any woman," Luca replied, his voice strong. "She's the only one who's ever cared about me. The only one who's ever seen me for who I am, not what I represent. And I'll fight for her, for us, no matter what it costs." Alessandro stepped forward, his towering presence intimidating. "You've made your choice. And now, you'll face the consequences. You'll never escape the Romano name. You'll never escape me." But Luca wasn't afraid anymore. "Maybe I can't escape you, but I can choose my own path. I don't need your approval. I don't need your world. I've already made my decision, and I won't back down." The silence that followed was deafening. Alessandro didn't speak for a long moment, his gaze piercing Luca as if trying to break his resolve. But Luca stood firm, his eyes unwavering, knowing that this was the moment everything changed. After what felt like an eternity, Alessandro spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. "You've chosen a woman over your blood, Luca, and that will be your undoing." But Luca was resolute. "I've chosen my own future, and that's the only thing that matters now." Alessandro turned away, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Luca thought the confrontation might be over, but then Alessandro spoke again, his tone filled with an unspoken warning. "The world you've chosen is dangerous, Luca. You think Maria will protect you? You think you can escape this life unscathed? You're wrong." Luca's chest tightened, but he refused to show weakness. "I'm not running anymore. I'm done being your pawn." Alessandro looked at him one last time, his eyes cold with finality. "Then you've sealed your fate." As Alessandro turned and walked away, Luca felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The battle wasn't over, but he had made the decision that would define his future. He had chosen a life with Maria, and that was all that mattered now. But even as he stood there, his heart racing, with a mixture of fear and resolve, he knew the war was far from over. Alessandro wouldn't give up easily, and the dangers that lurked in the shadows of the Romano Empire were just beginning to reveal themselves. Luca turned to Maria, who had been waiting for him outside the study. Her eyes met his, filled with concern and love. "Luca," she said softly, "are you okay?" He smiled at her, the weight of the world still on his shoulders, but a sense of peace beginning to settle over him. "I'm okay. I've made my choice, Maria, and I won't back down." She stepped forward, her hand finding his. "We'll face whatever comes, together." Luca nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Together," he repeated. As they stood there, side by side, Luca knew that whatever happened next, he was no longer alone. The road ahead would be long and dangerous, but he was ready to fight for the life he had chosen. The life with Maria. And nothing, not even his father's empire, could take that away from him. In this gripping tale of love and power, follow the journey of a young man caught between his father's empire and a woman who represents everything he wants but can't have. A mafia boss's son makes a shocking decision when he chooses a simple nanny over the rich women his father has chosen to be his new mother. The consequences of this decision set in motion a series of events that will test loyalty, love, and survival. This dark romance delves into the complexities of choosing between love and power, and the sacrifices made when defying family expectations. As Luca rebels against the life his father built for him, he finds himself entangled in a dangerous world where every choice has its price. With betrayal, tension, and fierce determination, this story of forbidden love unfolds with twists and turns. The intense emotions and dark undertones of this dark romance make it impossible to stop reading. The relationship between Luca and Maria is tested by outside forces, but their connection remains unshaken. Will they survive the mafia world and the brutal realities that come with it? In a world where love is complicated by loyalty and danger, this dark romance explores the strength of the human spirit and the lengths people will go for the ones they love. This dark romance is not just a story of passion but a battle for freedom and identity, set against a backdrop of crime, betrayal, and power. As the stakes get higher, Luca must confront his father's wrath and decide what kind of man he will become. Will he succumb to the expectations of his bloodline, or forge his own path in this dark romance that will keep you on the edge of your seat? This intense dark romance story will leave you questioning the true cost of choosing love over loyalty.